A lot of questions about the potential government shutdown on the horizon and what is going on with that. Because this is, as former President Joe Biden would have said, a BFD. And not simply because a government shutdown is always a BFD, but because of what it signifies in this moment. So a government shutdown happens when the government doesn't have funding. And that's different. I've talked to you 1,000 times about the debt ceiling. These are not the same thing. They're it's all about money, but it's in money about money in very different ways. What has happened is that the fiscal year for the United States government runs out on at the end of September 30th. That's the end of the fiscal year. Now, theoretically, Congress is supposed to have passed a budget, is supposed to have passed appropriations, of course, long ago before this, not now. They're supposed to have done it long ago. But Congress always these days has a problem passing appropriations bills. Now, when they pass appropriations bills, remember, there are 12 of them. It's not just one bill. There are 12 bills that correspond to each of the appropriations subcommittees. So there are appropriations committees in each House of Congress, and then there are subcommittees in that. And those subcommittees then take a look at their numbers and say what they're willing to pay, and take a look at all the caps and the things they have to do and so on when they're putting together their appropriations measures. And in the case of this particular Congress, they haven't passed any. Now, this Congress is the least productive in the history of the United States. It's done virtually nothing except pass that omnibus bill through the budget reconciliation measure, which meant that it did not need any Democratic buy-in, which at the time they thought was a great idea, but now has got them in real trouble because they own the whole freaking thing, including all the mistakes they made in it. And they also passed a continuing resolution with the help of Democratic votes to a continuing resolution is if you haven't passed the appropriations bills and you're running out of money, they can pass something called a continuing resolution that continues the funding of the government at the levels that it has been funded up until then. And that happened back in March, which you may or not remember. Anyway, the appropriations have not gone through, so the government is funded only through midnight or 11:59 or whatever on September 30th of this year, which is 5 days away. So normally, let me actually tell you about how this has gone, and then I'll tell you what normally happens. Okay, so what happened was on September 19th, the House of Representatives pushed through only with well, no, that's not true. There was one Democrat who voted for it and two Republicans who voted against it. But they passed through a continuing resolution to say we're going to keep the government funded at this level until I think it's March of 2026. And we'll spend the next several months hashing out what is going to go into those appropriations bills. Again, which were supposed to be done by now. I'm not going to editorialize, I promise, although it's killing me. Some of us have to live with deadlines. By the way, do you know where we get the idea of a deadline? I mean, this is sort of horrible. So turn this off or go get a cup of tea or something if you don't want to hear it. But in the Andersonville prison camp in the American Civil War, they were very short of wood to build palisades. And so they did have a wooden fence around the prison camp, but they had a number of feet within it, a string. Sometimes it was there and sometimes it got broken, that if you crossed over it, looking as if you were going to go for the palisade and try to climb over, that the guards in the corners would shoot you. So if you cross that line, that was you were going to be shot and killed. So they began to call that the deadline. And that's, at least in American history, where we get the idea of a deadline. So every time I sort of say the word deadline, I think of that and recognize that me not finishing an article in time is nowhere near the same thing. I'm more of the principle of that cartoon that says, I love deadlines. I love the rushing sound they make as they whoosh on by. Anyway, on the 19th of September, the House of Representatives passed a continuing resolution, and it went to, which, if you think about the date, that was last Friday, because again, remember, Congress is not in session this week. The Senate took it up and it didn't pass. The Senate, a number of Republicans didn't vote for it. I think it was 2 Republicans didn't vote for it. The Democrats didn't vote for it. And what they were saying to the House is, this ain't going to fly. This is not the way we're going to do this. We're not just going to do a continuing resolution. But Johnson, Speaker Johnson, who's a very close ally of Donald Trump, said, whoop, we're out of here. We're not only are we going to take next week off, which is in the calendar, which you can look at online, by the way, we're not coming back Monday or Tuesday. So we're not going to come back until after this deadline. So if you want to fund the government, you have to accept the continuing resolution that we just put through. And it was a relatively clean one, they call it, because what it said was that they were going to keep funding the government with the addition of security measures for a number of lawmakers. The Senate said, this ain't happening. And now they got a problem. The Republicans have a problem in the Senate, because in the Senate, if you remember, and I've talked about this a lot too, they have this institution called the filibuster. And the way you should think about the filibuster is just what it means is that there is no rule to make a senator stop talking. The House had to come up with one in the early 19th century. So you can't pull that in the House, but you can pull it in the Senate. And this is one of the things that former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell used to extraordinary effect to stop anything from going through the Senate, is simply by using the filibuster, because it has been modernized to the point where, rather than having to actually stand up and talk, the way Strom Thurmond did, for example, to stop the passage of the 1957, I believe it was, Civil Rights Act. Not that it worked, but that was his attempt. That was the thing that Senator Cory Booker spoke for longer than that this year. If you remember, that's one of the reasons Cory Booker's speech was got a lot of press, is because before that, Strom Thurmond trying to stop civil rights was the longest speech in Senate history. Booker was not filibustering. He was simply speaking, but that's what those things were doing there. Anyway, because they have this filibuster, you don't have to stop someone to there's no way to make someone stop speaking. And because it is modernized, so all you have to do is say, if you go forward, I will filibuster. You don't actually have to do it. In order to get anything through the Senate, you have to get 60 votes. So that being the case, the Republicans don't have 60 votes. They have 52 votes. So they're going to need 8 Democratic votes in order to get anything through the Senate. Now, here's a problem. One of the problems is that the Republicans have simply refused to talk to the Democrats. They're not negotiating. They're not trying to come up with anything. Trump has told them not to talk to the Democrats. They're just saying to the Democrats, suck it and vote for this, because we know you hate government shutdowns because it hurts people, and we think you're going to do this. Well, but here's the problem for the Republicans. That budget reconciliation bill they passed back in July, that thing they called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the problem with that is that it has a number of extraordinarily unpopular things in it. And one of the things they did, some people liked it in the Republican Party and some people didn't. But if you remember, the members of the Republican Party have never liked the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. And one of the things they did in that budget reconciliation bill was they stripped out the tax credits that make it possible for people who are between the 100% and 400% of the federal poverty level to afford to buy health care on the Affordable Care Act markets. Now, that will strip, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, that'll strip about 4.2 million people off of health care. But what it will also do is it's sending healthcare premiums through the freaking roof. If you have not gotten yours yet, if this affects you, you're going to be horrified when you see these measures come in. And it especially at a time when the economy is slowing, there are fewer jobs, and inflation is going up pretty dramatically. A lot of people are suddenly going to be facing this fall without being able to afford health care. And so what the Democrats have said is that we're not going to sign anything unless we have ironclad um, commitments in writing that you're going to put this that we're going to put these subsidies back in place, because it's not only hurting the 4.2 million people who are going to lose their subsidies because they can't afford them, and it's not only going to hurt the people who are going to be kicked off Medicaid, which they've also asked to be addressed, but it's going to hurt all regular Americans who have to deal with healthcare premiums because they're all going through the roof. Because what happens is, without these subsidies, healthier people are dropping out of the markets, and that means the pool that's left is sicker, and that means that it costs more to insure those people in those pools. That's the whole point of how Obamacare, which by the way came from a Republican think tank, in place of healthcare for everybody, which is what liberals wanted. That whole market idea just lost all the people who are kind of buoying it up. So the Democrats have said, this ain't freaking happening. We're not going to do this, because every time we say we're going to negotiate with you and we'll give you a little rope, you use it to hang us. And we must stand firm on health care for people before we take anything else on, especially when you got Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in there as Secretary of Health and Human Services, who is really messing up the healthcare system in the United States. So the Democrats have said, absolutely, we're not going to do this. Okay, so what normally happens in a crisis like this, and these are very modern, by the way, what normally happens is there is a negotiation. Everybody comes up with something they can agree on. They pass a continuing resolution with whatever they've come up with. And it's never the whole thing. It's a little tweak here or there. And then it passes and people go forward and continue the negotiations. But in this case, in the past, Republicans have often refused to do that because they want more cuts. And they're saying, oh, the Democrats are just doing what we always do that they get mad at, is, they're slowing things down because they want stuff. But the Democrats have countered with, now, hang on a second. We don't want cuts. We want people to have health insurance. And this is something that we're willing to stand on. So they are standing firm on that. Now, so that's how it's supposed to go and goes in the past. But now we have a whole new monkey wrench in this moment. And this is why I said it's a BFD. And that's that you may have heard me talk before about the director of the Office of Management and Budget, probably something you haven't spent a great deal of your time thinking about in your lives. But it's really important right now because the director of the Office of Management and Budget is a man named Russell Vogt. Russell Vogt is a fervent Christian nationalist who believes that we are in what he calls a post-constitutional moment. He believes that the U.S. government has been completely corrupted by what he calls the left, and that means anybody who is not MAGA. And what they have done is they have used that government to create this secular world in which people are not following God and who are relying on the government, and it's doing all sorts of stuff that he doesn't want it to do. He wants to strip it all the way back to at least the 1920s, if not before. And you see his fingerprints all over the Department of Government Efficiency, for example, where billionaire Elon Musk was the head theoretically, but the real cuts were coming from Russell Vogt. And you can read about what he cares about because he was one of the key architects of Project 2025. Anyway, last night he released to a whole bunch of newspapers the news that if the government shuts down, that the government is just going to fire everybody. And that this is exactly what he wants. He wants to get rid of the modern government. And he was expecting that, or at least probably trying, I shouldn't say what he was expecting, who knows, I'm not in his head. He was clearly trying to put pressure on the Democrats to go, oh God, we're in trouble now. We better go ahead and do this because then all our people get fired. That has not happened. The Democrats have said, what difference does it make? You're firing people anyway. And, we've got all these cases where there's been this stripping of the US government, and then they're court cases and you lose them all. And all of a sudden you have to beg people to come back. Right now, that's happened today. There's a major rehiring underway. in one of the government agencies, where the people who were fired by Doge essentially got 7 months paid vacation because now they're being begged to come back because they cut too deeply. And the Democrats have said, we're going to have the showdown now because we don't want the government that Russell Vogt, who is an unelected bureaucrat, is trying to force down the American people's throats. And this is increasing now the pressure on the Republicans, who recognize that, in fact, those cuts to health care are really unpopular. And a lot of Republicans actually would like to fix that, what they consider a mistake. Other Republicans who want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act are like, don't even think about going there. We're not going to take that on because we want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. So what you are really seeing in this moment is a showdown between the extreme radical MAGA mindset, the Christian nationalist mindset. And I believe Russell Vogt would be one of the first to call himself an extremist. He has called for a new American revolution, saying this is a way to get rid of the modern government and to start again with a new old one, if you will. The people around him consider this a revolution. You have a showdown between that and those of us who support the modern American government. Not I don't think anybody would say it's perfect. I'm actually quite looking forward to seeing changes in it going forward, over things like healthcare, for example, and daycare and restoring cancer research, and I could keep on going. But what you're seeing here is this struggle between those who want to completely slash the federal government and get rid of almost all non-discretionary spending, and those of us who are like, no, we actually quite like the EPA, and we quite like having our airplanes stay in the sky, and we quite like cancer funding and education and healthcare and all the things that we think are important that they are trying to get rid of. So what's going to happen going forward is you're seeing this showdown. I would speak up if I were you, but you are also going to see people really calculating about what parts of the federal government they think are important. Now, in a shutdown, the non-discretionary spending and the things that the executive branch thinks are important continue to be funded. It's everything else that gets furloughed or, as Vogt says, cut. And we'll see how that plays out. But that's very much on the table right now.